Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Damaname Zianza. I am one of the lay teachers here, and I'm teaching in place of Lee today. I hope his trial stuff is going well. It's something he had to do. So I'm going to give a talk on Anathapindika. He was someone, if you're familiar with Buddhist teachings, he was a lay follower of the Buddha quite a long time ago, back in the Buddhist time. He was he was actually the chief male benefactor. So basically he funded a lot of the original early Sangha. And he was a pretty interesting person, but I won't go too much into him, but I like to explore these early people from the suttas. So I'm going to talk about him, but I'm also going to talk about some of the teachings that he received. There are a couple of really interesting and in-depth suttas that address Anathapindika. But first I'll go into who he was. He was basically a banker and a merchant. Some of the Buddhist suttas record him, going somewhere on business, things that he did to donate. Basically, he donated and helped build an entire monastery that was one of the main two monasteries in the Buddhist time. He would feed quite a few of the monastics, as well as anyone that needed food. So he had, I think I read he had 5 stations set up at one time in a city that he was feeding, whoever wanted food. His original name, or non-nickname, Anathapindika is a nickname that he had. But his original name was Sudatta, so that's one you might have seen too. But Anathapindika means one who gives alms to the unprotected. But he's a great example of generosity. So he actually, through his life, he was wealthy, and according to the suttas and the commentary, he was basically bankrupt by the time he passed away, partly because he gave so much to the Sangha, but also because it says that he made some unwise business decisions. So he's also a good example of someone who probably went through some tribulations and trials that you might see. He didn't just have a charmed life or anything like that. Apparently he had a relatively painful death that's recorded. He lost his whole fortune. So he was a lay practitioner dealing with the world. And that's the things that we have to go through sometimes. But it's interesting, when Anathapindika, before he even received that name as Sudatta, when he heard about the Buddha, he was very motivated to go. He had maybe some past inclination to see the Buddha. He was very motivated to meet the Buddha. And so he woke up multiple times in the night and thought it was morning, and then he'd say, oh, it's still nighttime. And he would go back to bed. And the third time he did that, he thought it was morning or close enough to it, but it was darker than he thought. And he ran through a graveyard. He encountered all kinds of fearful sort of thoughts. So it was dark in this graveyard. And as he was going through it, the story says that a spirit kept encouraging him to go forward. So eventually he met the Buddha, and the Buddha called him by name, which was kind of exceptional because he hadn't actually met the Buddha yet. He said, "Come, Sudatta." And during that first teaching, so it says, he achieved some level of understanding of the Buddhist teachings. There's a really good teaching on Anathapindika on his deathbed, essentially, when he pleads in a way for Sariputra to come and teach him a little bit and talk to him. He was going through a lot of pain, apparently, as I was saying earlier. But Sariputra was one of the Buddhist disciples, and he gives a really deep teaching on not clinging to the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and the earth element, earth, wind, fire, and air, as well as basically not clinging to consciousness or the consciousness that arises based on things that we encounter. But Anathapindika, I'm sure that in his teaching or in his donation and dealings with the Sangha, he probably encountered these teachings, but this is the first time that he felt he had received a teaching directly from the Sangha, from the monastic community at that time. So he pleaded that such talk on the Dhamma be given to lay people clothed in white. That's what they wore at that time. Because there would be people that would understand it. And I think that's really important in the suttas, because a lot of the readings, if you go back and look at Samyutta Nikaya or Majjhima Nikaya, they're addressed toward the monastics, because the Buddha was teaching the monastics at the time. So it was recorded in that way. But this is also accessible to the lay community. This isn't something that only monastics can understand. There's, within the lay practice, there is the ability to make progress on the path and understand these things and deal with and understand clinging and craving from a different perspective. So some of this I've already gone over, but I really like these couple of teachings on that were given to Anathapindika, because they're not really surface level. Some of the teachings that in Buddhism are directed toward lay people, they all kind of have a deeper meaning, but sometimes they're focused on, how do I have a better rebirth? Or how do I have a happy life? How do I make sure that, people respect me in this life and things like that. But these teachings were more directed, it seemed, toward spiritual progress. The other ones are too, but the Buddha taught what he taught toward the level of understanding of the listener. So apparently Anathapindika's understanding was relatively deep. He was what they call a stream enterer in the old texts, meaning that there are 4 stages of realization that you can read about in Pali Buddhism, Theravada Buddhism. And the first lowest one of those is a Sotapanna, or stream enterer. But a stream enterer is somebody that has been able to perceive and see what the Buddha taught with their own eyes, their own understanding and cognition in that teaching. It's not something we talk about a lot in Mahayana, because the focus isn't on necessarily getting out of the wheel of suffering, but helping others. So not something you'll hear a lot, but it is important when we're talking about Anathapindika. So the one that I'm going to go over is Samyutta Nikaya 12.41. And I'm just going to read it to you. It takes a handful of minutes, but it's relatively short. The things that it goes over, I'll just leave it on this overview slide and kind of proceed as we go, because I know just listening to a whole sutta isn't always the most beneficial for attention holding. At Savatthi, the householder Anathapindika approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. The Blessed One said to him, "Householder, when 5 fearful animosities have subsided in a noble disciple, he possesses the 4 factors of stream entry, and he has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom the noble method. If he wishes, he could by himself declare himself, I am one finished with hell, finished with the animal realm, finished with the domain of ghosts, finished with the plane of misery, the bad decisions, the netherworld. I am a stream enterer, no longer bound to the netherworld, fixed in destiny, with enlightenment as my destination. What are the 5 fearful animosities that have subsided? Householder, one who destroys life engenders on account of such behavior fearful animosity pertaining to the present life, and fearful animosity pertaining to the future life. He experiences mental pain and displeasure. Thus, for one who abstains from destroying life, this fearful animosity has subsided." And it says the same for one who takes what is not given, one who engages in sexual misconduct, one who speaks falsely, one who indulges in wine, liquor, and intoxicants that are a basis for negligence engenders on account of such behavior, fearful animosity pertaining to the present life, and fearful animosity pertaining to the future life. and he experiences mental pain and disease. Thus, for one who abstains from those that are a basis for negligence, this fearful animosity has subsided. These are the 5 fearful animosities that have subsided. What are the 4 factors of stream entry that he possesses? Here, householder, the noble disciple possesses confirmed confidence in Buddha. Thus, the Blessed One is an arhat, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of devas and humans, the enlightened one, the Blessed One. He possesses confirmed confidence in the Dhamma. Thus, the Dhamma is well expounded by the Blessed One, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. He possesses confirmed confidence in the Sangha. Thus, the Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way, practicing the straight way, the true way, the proper way. We'll skip a little bit there that doesn't pertain. He possesses the virtues dear to noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unmodeled, freeing, praised by the wise, ungrasped, leading to concentration. These are the 4 factors of stream entry that he possesses. And what is the noble method that he has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom? Here, householder, the noble disciple attends closely and carefully to dependent origination. Thus, when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. That is, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness. And it continues on through. If you've never seen dependent origination, there's a whole sequence that ends with suffering and birth and death. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering, but with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness, etc., such as the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. We're almost done. This is the noble method that he has clearly seen and thoroughly penetrated with wisdom. And then basically the sutta is done at that point. It's just repeating that Anathapindika is somebody who clearly perceived and understood these things. But let's go back to the abstaining from the 5 fearful animosities. These are what a lot of people call the 5 precepts. These are the basis for your own moral. Moral is kind of a loaded word in English language, I guess. Your own wholesome conduct. So if you do these things, abstain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, speaking falsely, gossip, lies, use of intoxicants, then you've cut out many of the things that are creating negative karma or negative karmic effects for you. And what is the point of that? The Buddha says in this sutta that helps with concentration. It's not just doing things because morally they're the right thing to do. It actually helps you to calm down your mind. So these are things that in order to be someone, this is why we'll talk about stream entry, even though it's not something that I'm trying to get or trying to do. It's something that I want to understand. And I think that it's helpful for people to understand because this is someone that has achieved the base level of understanding of the Dhamma for themselves. So to understand it and see it for yourself, to see, oh, I understand now how things arise and pass away. I understand how things come to be in the mind. I think that's very valuable. And you can't do that without abstaining from these things. So your mind wouldn't be calm. So this is a precondition toward understanding the Dhamma, toward really seeing it for yourself and truly getting it. These 4 factors of stream entry, these are, when it says factors, meaning that these are things that someone who has attained a level of understanding of the Dhamma has these as factors of their existence. So essentially, these are things that they understand. They just are qualities that they have. So the first three of these are commonly talked about as the refuges, the three refuges, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And taking refuge isn't just like taking solace in them necessarily. There's more to it, as you can see here. These are qualities and factors that you cultivate and have a part of yourself invested in. But it's also saying that this person who understands the Dhamma to do so, they possess virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, unborn, unblemished, unmodeled, freeing, praised by the wise, ungrasped, and leading to concentration. Another hint that cultivation of these things is something that you do in your life, and it's not just things to do because they're the right thing to do. You're doing them because they lead you toward understanding the Dhamma. They help you to have better meditation. And the noble method clearly perceived. This talks about dependent origination. I won't go too deeply into dependent origination, but it's basically the cause and effect of the mind, how things arise and pass away. This leads to that. So, but the challenge, I think, is that as a lay practitioner, we're pulled this way and that by a lot of difficulties, the vicissitudes of life. Things are going to happen where, it's like Caddy was saying in her talk the last time, if you might feel very peaceful, but if someone was to come up and take all your money from your bank account, then you might not feel peaceful anymore. You didn't realize you were attached to those things. And we have so many things that we're interacting with in life that we might not realize we're attached to. Just because you don't feel anger doesn't mean the seed of anger isn't there waiting. So I'll get more into that. But I love to go over, with any Buddhist teaching, what's the point? Because you could sit here and read suttas, and if you don't understand necessarily what the point is, or you misunderstand, well, that's not really helping you. But it does apply to us. It applies to us quite a bit because we're so entrenched in desire and craving that we might not see it, we might not know how to deal with it. The Buddhist teaching here in this sutta is talking about things that we can tangibly do, the 5 precepts or things that we can follow. Trying to cultivate those virtues, those, basically the rest of the suttas talk about ways that you interact with craving, ways that you interact with the world and your sense consciousness, and how to deal with those things. So it does definitely apply in this way, because as we're going through life, I'll kind of explain a couple of examples of how and why this is useful. As we're going through life, we're going to encourage a lot of difficulties. Not just lay life, though. Of course, monastics have this as well. But it's all about watering the right seeds. Something that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, and other practitioners and teachers will also talk about, basically that your choices in the present lead to consequences in the future, whether those are good or bad. So future consequences are partly dependent on your past, but they're also dependent on your choice in this moment. So basically, if you're choosing this moment to do the wholesome thing, if you're doing the practice, if you're following the precepts, then essentially you're steering your future in a more wholesome direction. If you're choosing not to do those things, then you can steer your future in an unwholesome direction. So essentially it comes down to, especially when you're first learning how to practice, as many times a day as you can, coming back to this choice, every choice, even a footstep when you're doing walking meditation, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So if you're staying with this moment, if you're making what you believe is the right choice based on your intention, then in the future, you can expect a wholesome result. If you have to do this 1,000 times a day, this is how it is. I think that if you practice this consistently, when you're in meditation, when you're not in meditation, coming back and come back, make the right choice, see what you're doing right now. If you're not doing anything that's wholesome, then you can basically choose to do a wholesome thing in that moment. And that's really the crux of it. That's how you steer. That's how you change your future. But the why is important too. That's the how, but why would you do that? Getting a more wholesome result is great, but we're going to go into the world and we're going to see, for example, for me, I have difficulty with food. So bag of Cheetos or something like that, I'm not going to eat just like 5 Cheetos. I'm going to eat too many Cheetos. And the whole time, I have a couple of choices. A couple of choices there would be initially, maybe don't eat so many of those, but that's not how it happens a lot of times. Being entrenched in craving, I'm going to eat too many, but you can begin to really sort of work out what's happening when I'm putting more of this in my mouth. And this feeling, like this thought, maybe I should have stopped a minute ago and you keep eating. Whenever you're dealing with that, you can start to analyze that. And that realization, that really analysis, I think is the beginning of where you can start to make a little bit of a choice that in the future, your future might not contain as many Cheetos, because you're gonna be able to see that craving before it really takes control of you. One example of acting within the moment. This isn't with Cheetos, but it's with something that happened the other day. One time in the past, this was the first time this happened. I lost my wedding ring in the backyard. It took me almost 40 hours of looking, and in a week, as well as working at that time, that I ended up finding it, and I didn't think I could. I lost it again the other day. You wouldn't think that I could. Doesn't take much. It took just a moment of inattention. I'm usually very attentive throughout the day, maybe 1,000 times a day. I'm trying to come back to the moment, and I stay with it for a time and get distracted. But it happened. I found it back after about an hour and a half. But when I lost it and realized again, it was gone. That feeling that I had in the past that I dealt with, that 40 hours of practice essentially while I was looking through the backyard and ended up finding it. That whole time I was trying to deal with these feelings that came up, the feeling of stupidity, the feeling of frustration, feeling of how could I do something like this? And this time when I lost it, I caught it. You can catch it before it really gets out of hand, before it takes control of you. And I did that by practice. So I stayed calm, feeling came up, and I allowed it to go, just came back to the moment, and my search was much more efficient because I was able to be there in that moment, not somewhere else, chiding myself and being frustrated about losing this wedding ring again. But here it is. I'll never take it off. This is a popular image in Buddhism. There's stuff about kind of like Anathapindika was talking about. There will be people who can understand these type of teachings within the lay community. There's a Buddhist sutta, I can't remember right offhand what it is, but it talks about how some people are at a higher level of development, or higher, quote unquote, more developed in that they can understand the Dhamma better. Those people are like a lotus that's above the water. Some people are, like a lotus that's just beginning to sprout. You can see at the bottom, it's just beginning to bloom. They might have an understanding, but it's a different understanding. It's not the full understanding of the Dhamma, but it can begin. And some people are below the water, So we're all in a different place. But if we can all make more wholesome choices, better choices, and understand how to steer our future, how to steer the ship basically in the right direction, then I think we'll be in a better situation. And I think that the last part of the sutta goes over dependent origination. And this is something that I didn't put up the whole graphic of what it is. There's too much information if you're a beginner in it. If you're not a beginner, you've already seen it. And so not really very important or helpful right now. So the important thing, though, is that meditation partly is there for you to see and understand how your thoughts are arising and passing away. and to understand and be mindful of your own interaction with those thoughts. So, what does that mean? During meditation, when you sit, you would have a lot of things come up. Everyone does. Doesn't matter how developed you are, how long you've been meditating. Lots of things are going to come up and pass away. And how you deal with those things is what dictates in the future whether those things come up and pass away as much again, or how important they are. Like I always use anxiety for a basis. Anxiety is something that I've always struggled with. As I come up to do a talk, public speaking is always very scary. So I've used that example a few times. And every time you interact with it and deal with it, if you deal with it in the right way, it will come up, you'll see it and note it. And if you let it pass away without really messing with it, without clinging to it and grabbing it and trying to push it away or try to pull yourself towards your meditation object, then this anxiety will come less and less. So of course today, yeah, anxiety came up, but as I was sitting in meditation, I just allowed it to be there. You move on, basically just letting it spin itself out, let it go, let it move on into oblivion, because it doesn't exist unless I create it, unless I cause it to exist. So you don't perpetuate it, it can pass away. And the beginning of real investigation is when you can see these things come up and pass away in meditation. You can see how they come up, not interact with them, see that they pass away without independent existence. So when they don't exist on their own, it's you that is creating them. If you really investigate further and further, you'll see that there's not really you that's interacting with them. They're just doing things. You're not choosing to be anxious in that moment. You're not choosing, any of the things that come up. Why would you? But it's just a process that's going forward. It's an impersonal, process that you don't have to feel like is your fault. It's not anything that you caused. It is something that you have control over. Someday, not this thought that you have in this moment, but the future thoughts. And the goal eventually is to refine your understanding and your vision so that during meditation, you see these things coming up and passing away, you can really understand what that means. So it takes some practice, it takes some understanding of the Dharma, but eventually you can start to get some equanimity and some distance. And once you have more and more distance from these thoughts, then they become less and less impactful. You can exist independently of them. So one thing that I think is helpful in this discussion, talking about things to do with right concentration and meditation. So I like to use the example of a pen for basically anything. So if we have a pen and you're thinking about how to pick it up, there's not really any effort or intention involved, right? You just pick it up. For someone that was a child, maybe you haven't learned yet how to pick up the pen, you might grasp it, someone who has maybe not as much experience with writing, they might grasp the pen too firmly here. Same thing with concentration. Whenever the word concentration is a little bit loaded and it sounds like you're concentrating harder when you're getting better at concentration. And that's not always true. You're just learning more skillful attention. So when you move to your object of meditation that 1,000 times a day or whatever you do, it's not about like pulling toward it and focusing on it. It's about letting your mind rest on it and be with it and not struggling to push anything away, not grasping toward anything, just like you would hold a pen when you're writing. That's the ideal. And then I'll just spend a little bit of time on another interesting sutta. I don't have much time left, but this one's right after the sutta that I just went over. It talks about, it's called The Origin of the World, 12.44, and it talks about dependence on the I informs, I consciousness arises, the meaning of the three is contact, Contact as condition, feeling comes to be. With feeling as condition, craving comes to be. And that's how this whole wheel of suffering perpetuates forward. But the part that I'm getting to, what bhikkhus, that's monks, is the passing away of the world. In dependence on I informs, I consciousness arises. The meaning of the three is contact. With contact as condition, feeling comes to be. Feeling is condition, craving. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving comes the cessation of clinging. Cessation of clinging comes cessation of existence. This isn't just on a larger scale where it's talking about your birth and your death, although it is talking about that too. This is for your thoughts as they're coming up. This is when you put more craving into your thoughts, of course they get stronger, you're indulging them, they grow. When you stop putting craving into them, when you start to move toward a meditation object that is a wholesome object without craving and desire in it, then look, it says right here, with the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving comes cessation of clinging. So it's your job during meditation to learn how do you sit with your object without pushing and pulling, without craving, without desire. It's just, that's what they mean when they talk about no goal. There's no goal and there's no path. It's because all you're doing is just sitting with your objects. There's nothing else to do. You just observe. And that is really hard to do. It is very difficult. But once you get the knack of it, it's just the same as lifting up this pen to write.